We are live. Hello and greetings. You too, fellow travelers, can join us on the great journey that we've been on through movies, entertainment, and whatnot in the land of the Vlogcast.
Can't forget the whatnots.
And of course, we have two people that are guests, and they've been on with us since we've been doing a lot of these kind of freeform shows. We have Dane Kyle.
Hello.
And David Streggy.
Hello.
But of course, we can't forget Kotobuki Jake, my co-host for most of this.
Hello.
And we have some fun stuff. We're just gonna again freeform discussion, just enjoyable. Anybody here who's watching, feel free to chime in the comment section. We are looking at that to answer your questions. I try and, if we slow down the discussion, I'll throw it in edgewise.
All right.
But I did want to lead us off on this because I saw a movie last night that I apparently have been needing to see for a long time, and then realized later on that maybe I didn't need to see it so badly after all.
Isn't that always the way?
And that is Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. Has everybody here seen that? I know Jake has, and I think, Dane, you've seen it, right?
Yeah, I saw it in the theater.
And
that was the last movie I saw physically in a theater before the world ended.
I did.
What a way to end.
Well, it's I mean, I don't know. I could have thought of worse movies to go out on, you know.
Yeah. It was
like
fun.
It could have been like a, That's My Boy or something like that, you know.
Or we were just talking about in our new releases list, we were talking about one of the biggest bombs of the year before, Rhythm Section, which bombed even before people stopped going to theaters.
I saw the film.
Oh, you did see the film.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so at least we all have, we've all seen it, and that's a good thing. Of course, there are potential spoilers for some of these discussions, since they are freeform. I'm not gonna make any promises I can't keep.
And no bar fights or witch hunts of any kind.
Nope.
Because as I said in the chat there, it's like pretty much these days it's pretty much impossible to. And it's so unfortunate that it's pretty much impossible to talk about Star Wars without it turning into like the internet equivalent of a bar fight or like a crusade or something like that.
No bar fights or witch hunts, but I will turn to voodoo.
VOODOO or VUDU.
I won't get that much more freeform. I will not turn into the dark side. I'm still physical form. I'm not streaming entirely.
Oh, and Michael McNally does say hello and wishes us well. Wish you yours well as well, if you're still watching. So, I am not one of I'm not one of those ultra like. I just don't get the anger at the series. I didn't get it when the Last Jedi. One came out. I didn't love the film. I didn't hate the film, but just
I've been neutral about the series as in general. I mean, it's people who are Star Wars or Star Trek fans. You're either a diehard religious fan, or you're just a fan in general. And those who tend to be fanboys were downright horrible about the film.
I felt like that was a very weird tonal shift, though, in Rise of Skywalker. I mean, even weirder compared to the third film.
Return of the Jedi?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Return of the Jedi, which was still a bit of an upturn, but I don't know. It almost felt like they were trying to do a Marvel movie type thing.
That's what
Well, in a way.
people said that about the humor in the last two, which I've never really, I don't know, I've never really understood that. I mean, because Star Wars was always humorous, like,
Right.
at least the original trilogy. I mean, they got a little. I mean, the argument that people would say from the prequels back when it was cool to hate on the prequels. The argument that they would always say was, "Oh, they take themselves too
Was?
seriously. They're too somber."
Which,
I guess
yeah,
that's like, just as a little preamble. That's like my number one point of frustration with the Star Wars fandom is that the exact same people that spent decades, or maybe 1 decade, a little over a decade, bashing the prequels, raking George Lucas over the coals, which I'm neither here nor there on that, but like they spent all that time doing that, and then they turned around once the new ones came out and they were like, oh, George Lucas is the prequels had such vision and they were underappreciated. I understand them now. And I'm like, fuck you, you turncoat. It's like,
yeah,
have an opinion and stick to it, or
yeah.
otherwise, be the hypocrite that you clearly are,
The prequels are still my least favorite trilogy. But they all have their merits. I mean, I think that nostalgia really does hit, because if you think about it, if you saw The Phantom Menace when you were really young,
which I did.
That to me would be the time to see it, because I saw it as an adult, and it felt like it wasn't really meant for me at the time. And
yeah, but I mean, I think that one of the things that you could have said about the prequels was that they were perhaps trying a little too hard to be all things for all people, and so then when you got to like Revenge of the Sith, which is the only film of the prequels that has things of like real dire consequence that last throughout the rest of the series, once you get there, then it gets like really serious, and it needs to be, because obviously some really, really important stuff happens. But once you get there, then it's like, oh well, gee whiz, we had Jar Jar Binks in the first one, and we had young Anakin, and then we had the 50s diner in Attack of the Clones, and we had all this stuff that you look at it against children being murdered, and genocide of the Jedi and all that stuff. It's like you compare those two things, and it's like, yeah, these don't really gel. And luckily, nothing really in the new films quite achieve that level of series-long disconnect.
The biggest issues, I think, that I actually really, really, really enjoyed The Force Awakens, and I really enjoyed The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
And I say point blank, I feel like they listened too hard to the haters, and either that or J.J. Abrams and whoever else was running the show really, 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 really wanted to tie it up in a particular manner, and they had buyer's remorse for letting Rian Johnson go so far afield. But whatever the case, they spent half the damn movie trying to undo the second movie. The first two movies, I liked them in part because to me they were two of the best standalone films in the entire franchise. Because the first trilogy is great, but it's one long movie split into 3 parts. And the second trilogy kind of is. Or the prequel, whatever. But this one, the first 2 movies, you get more if you know the other movies, but they still stand on their own as individual movies. The third one really doesn't, partly because it's trying so desperately to undermine the one that came before it. And it just, there were other issues as well, obviously, but that was my biggest one with that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the biggest thing with the prequels, other than Jar Jar Binks, the biggest thing I think with that one was an over-reliance on as you guys said, the doom and gloom, an over-reliance by far on CG, some of which hasn't aged as well. And Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman is a brilliant actress. Christensen is a decent actor, but whatever direction they were getting was awful because
it did not show their skills well at all. And obviously, Natalie Portman's gone on to do great things. And and even Hayden Christensen, like if you ever saw Shattered Glass,
that was a brilliant film.
Oh yeah,
you know that the guy can act. You know, he needs the right direction. And unfortunately, I think because the direction that both he and Natalie got for the prequel was clearly bad.
I liked Hayden Christensen before Star Wars, where he played in a house is not a home.
Life is a house. That's a good one too.
Life is a house.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at George Lucas's directing, he likes to direct his actors to be a bit wooden, or at least he had been. I mean, if you look at the original trilogy, especially the first one where he had, I think, one of the more heavier hands in as a director, you can tell the acting in that is quite wooden.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've said before, I love Mark Hamill as an actor. I can't stand him as Luke Skywalker.
Though Empire was really good, but if I recall correctly, Lucas didn't have as heavy a hand as a director in that.
Well, he didn't direct it. It was Irvin Kershner who did that one, and Richard Marquand who did Return of the Jedi. I want to just very quickly. So, as far as it feeling like one long movie, yes, the story treatment existed in the original version of the script. Well, one of the many versions existed, but they all underwent quite a lot of revisions before we got the versions that actually appeared on screen. So I mean, that's kind of true, but it's not. It's not like he had it all perfectly written out, and it stayed that way at every stage. Now to be fair, I think that they were more thought out for longer than, say, the Disney ones were, because I guess that some of the behind the scenes stuff that has come out, I guess that they hadn't really planned it as far in advance as they should have. Like if that were me doing it, I would have developed every piece of that story from beginning to end and would have said, okay, are we good with this? Okay, great, let's go for it. I would have done that beforehand, but I guess Star Wars has never really worked that way, even with George Lucas at the helm, because even the prequels and everything, they got tweaks and adjustments relative to how people responded. I mean, Jar Jar Binks got less and less screen time as the series went on, until eventually in Revenge of the Sith he's in like one shot and he doesn't even say anything, which is just as well. But so in other words, like even then, they were listening to fan feedback, but it didn't like necessarily derail the whole thing, which I do think that, like you said, with Rise of Skywalker, perhaps they overcorrected a little too much, or at least the impression of it was there. I would argue that they didn't overcorrect quite as much as some people have said, or rather they kind of took what Rian Johnson had done and were able to transmute it into something that is different, but it does kind of serve the overall trajectory of the character. Like I'm thinking of the revelation of Rey being Palpatine's granddaughter, which some people say, oh, that undoes the journey that she underwent in the last film. Well, not really, because when you think about it, in the last film, she had to learn that, she goes to a place of destiny to find answers about who she is from this external source, like would have happened in the prequels, which was all about destiny, all about, forces beyond one's control playing you like a, chess piece or whatever. And then the original trilogy was, okay, that exists, but maybe we had some agency in our lives. And then the sequels were like, well, maybe all that we have is ourselves and our choices, and that's what Last Jedi is about. So, once she figures out that, oh wait, maybe I really don't come from anything, maybe I'm just really a nobody, then she has to realize, well, I chart my own destiny. And so, she still learns that, except that once we get to Rise of Skywalker and we find out that she is, the descendant of someone who's powerful with the Force, okay, fine. But she's the granddaughter of Palpatine, who's that's like finding out that you're like the daughter of Satan, basically. So it's like, like, if that undoes it, then that's quite the undoing, because that would, you'd be begging to be a nobody after that,
Right.
So I kind of take a little bit of exception to that, just because
That
they were
kind
able
of
to turn it into something like, if you were to hear that, you'd be like, holy shit, I will go back to being a nobody, please,
That's not really the part that got me feeling that, though. It was all the little things. It was all the stuff like characters that were built up to be big characters who were marginalized or left out altogether. Certain actions and plot points were either explicitly shot down or just ignored. There was a lot of stuff that was set up, or the movie seemed to be going in a certain direction that was, like I said, marginalized, ignored, or straight up shot down. I did think the Palpatine thing felt like it came out of nowhere. So maybe if they had said to Ryan Johnson, hey, put a hint, just a hint, somewhere in your movie,
Yeah.
Then that might have been less out of left field when it finally happened.
You could
But,
definitely make that argument.
yeah.
I would also, just again playing devil's advocate,
Right.
I would make the counter argument that, and obviously this isn't canon anymore because of Disney saying everything, not including the
Right.
movies and the
Yeah.
Clone Wars series, saying that that's all non-canon. But the point is, if you are at least passingly familiar with the extended universe, which is now, Star Wars Legend, doesn't
Which
matter.
we are now that we saw the holiday special.
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter if you are or aren't, because anyway, the point is that in the extended universe, which I personally never accepted as canon, so it didn't really bother me, because I was just like, oh, that's just that's nice, whatever. But the movies are what counts. But anyway, the point is, in the extended universe, you had I think it was the Heir to the Empire story, I want to say, or Dark Empire, something like that. One of those. I think it was Dark Empire. But point is, in there you have a resurrected Palpatine who was in a clone body, and you had Luke actually turning to the dark side, not just becoming kind of a Force agnostic, shall we say, in The Last Jedi. So he was like full blown to the dark side. And, so you had a lot of these things that did come to fruition in the actual, films. So it's like, if you're at least passingly familiar with that, that's not totally a new concept to you. And like, for me, like when I saw Palpatine came back, I was like, well, yeah, I mean, he clearly had a clone body, and just because I was familiar with that, and it was like, oh, well, it didn't shock me, because I had those ideas explored already. And even Luke, not, like him kind of becoming like a gray Jedi in a way, or not even that, just more like, like apostatizing from the Force, if we want to use the religious word. Even that, like, that didn't shock me either, because I mean, that happens to people when they get older. Oftentimes they'll either get rock solid in their beliefs of whatever thing, or they'll apostatize, or they'll become disillusioned or whatever. And that can, and the point is that that can happen to someone as heroic as Luke. And if anything, like, his big the thing that drives him to do what he does is that he realizes that he is a fallible human being, and he is not, he's a human being, and not just this great legendary hero, like this figure of myth, like Ray thinks he is. So he's, in other words, like in real life, these great heroes, they're extremely flawed people, and they're capable of making mistakes and repeating the past, which is why he becomes so disillusioned, because he realizes, oh wait, I'm not this I'm not the mythical hero, I'm a human being. And that's a big deal for him, because he was this idealistic farm boy, and so he reaches that point, and he has to really just reevaluate everything that he thought about the Force and good and evil and everything. And it's like, that's pretty mature stuff. And I think a lot of people weren't necessarily ready for that, or they didn't expect it. But I mean, that's kind of my point, is like, if you are at least familiar with some of the other ideas that people have explored in that universe in some form or fashion, then some of those more radical ideas aren't necessarily new to you. And even the explanation I just gave for the Luke that we got on screen, that's even, I think, a little less radical than if he had turned full blown to the dark side. Imagine if that had happened, and the fan base would be tearing down the gates at Disney.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean,
be happy with what you got, guys.
I will toss only one bone to the rabid fandom, which I do. A lot of the rabid fandom of the Star Wars mythos was really into the extended universe, and they put way too much hope on Disney to revive the series and make the extended universe canon. And when they said that the extended universe is not canon, we're only doing the movies, there was going to be nothing that you could do to appease them after that point.
Yeah.
And it really goes back to that. Yes, if you use the extended universe, you could explain the Palpatine thing, but then they throw the extended universe aside and say, nope.
Well, it's not canon in that way, but it's also, it exists as a potential wellspring of ideas. And if anything, if you watch the Disney Star Wars films and The Mandalorian, if you watch those, you notice little bits and pieces that are picked up from the extended universe that kind of, or the expanded universe, that get brought back into continuity. Like in Solo, they mention Terrace Cassidy from the game, and in Rise of Skywalker, they actually have Force Heal finally, which we technically had seen on The Mandalorian before that with the child using it. But it's like all these little things that I had always wanted to see in the movies, even something as small as like Rey having a yellow lightsaber, which thank God we finally got a yellow lightsaber in the movies. I've been wanting to see that ever since I saw it in Knights of the Old Republic. It's like, some little things like that, they have been working their way back into continuity, and I'm very pleased with that. Even if it's just a little, thing that only the fans will get, it's like, it's not such a blatant thing that it'll interrupt the flow of the story. It's just a cool thing to know that is making its way back into continuity.
Well, I'm just to move this along. I did want to end in saying that though this was not my favorite movie, it was not my least favorite movie in the series. Probably my least favorite of this trilogy, but otherwise not the worst.
It's funny, like, I think honestly my least favorite of the series might have been The Force Awakens, which is, I really loved it. I had a great time with it. And it was a great way to reintroduce Star Wars to the public. I just, looking at it objectively, like, my big complaint with it was I felt like it was playing it a little too safe conceptually. It was a really fun time, and it was kind of what needed to happen to restart the series and all that, but and to kind of wash away the stink of the prequels and all that. And which again, I think the prequels, like, they have their moments for sure, so they're not like a total waste or anything, but my big thing was I felt like they weren't doing enough that was new, and that's why my favorite was The Last Jedi, because it took a ton of risks, and for me it went to some pretty mature places, and places that I think a lot of people weren't necessarily ready for. But I think over time, once the fan base calms down or finds something else to bitch about, I think that it'll be appreciated as like a really risky, thought-provoking film. It's not the temptation that the characters face is not to the dark side, but is towards a place that's beyond good and evil, beyond the typical conceptions of those things. And I think, wow, I never expected a big mainstream movie to do that. But then with Rise of Skywalker, like it was a little bit more familiar, except that for me, I liked it actually more than Return of the Jedi for the simple reason that it actually gave me a lot of stuff that I wanted from Return of the Jedi that it didn't give me. Like, I was never afraid for Luke in Return of the Jedi because by that time, like, he's conquered a lot of his demons and he's just kind of there to redeem his father. Like, he's not really able to be tempted all that much anymore. Whereas with Rey, like, she's still very vulnerable, and if anything, she's more vulnerable than she's ever been in the series because finding out that she is like the granddaughter of that universe's Satan, basically, and that finding out that she can use Force lightning, which Luke, he never did that. Like the worst he ever did was force choke the two Gamorrean guards, and that was clearly in self-defense. Like she did a full-on, aggressive move there, and I was like, holy shit, like that. I never imagined I'd see that, and so there it was like I was more afraid for her there than I had been for her throughout the entire series, and it's like that's what I wanted from Return of the Jedi, and it never gave that to me. So that was like the big thing that kept me going, was just the fact that she really was more emotionally vulnerable than ever, and that's what you need in the third part of a trilogy like that. You need the stakes to be even higher than they were before, and Return of the Jedi always let me down on that, so I felt like, hey, look at that, they finally got that right.
Mhm.
Well, let's see, Dave, I know you have to leave a little bit earlier, so I'll just skip over to you about moving on to, I guess, another film that you have seen. What's a film that you've seen this past couple of weeks?
Well, I went and checked out a film called Jurassic Galaxy.
Hmm.
It's a very fish kind of like our recent Mega Shark versus whatever, but it
That should be the title of the next one, Mega Shark versus whatever. And they throw literally everything at the Mega Shark, and it defeats everything that they throw at it. Like they could throw tornadoes, mummies, superheroes, Frankenstein's monster, vampires. They throw it all at the Mega Shark, and it defeats all of them.
Mega Shark versus the kitchen sink.
Exactly.
The basic storyline is that.
And then the person that defeats them is a resurrected Mr. Rogers.
That turns into a cyborg.
Exactly. A zombie cyborg Mr. Rogers. That it would be a fucking movie, my friends.
So what is the Jurassic Galaxy about?
It's not as cool as that, I can guarantee you.
Crew on a spaceship looking for a better Earth, or even a better world, have crash landed on this planet, and evidently their spaceship has separated itself into like a couple different areas. So we have several different groups of characters that are involved in this. One happens to be a security officer, and another seems to be a somewhat of a pilot, but apparently she wasn't that much involved in the ship. And then they end up journeying a little bit, and they journey a lot in this movie just to get to like these different parts. In fact, there's time spent journeying. So, but there are some dinosaurs in with the mix. It seems like there's a flock of velociraptor-like looking dinosaurs, and they're not too bad looking. I've seen worse. I've seen worse. But the thing is,
there we go. Make it dark versus Velocipaster.
They're not quite Jurassic Park, and see, Jurassic Park blew it out of the park. With dinosaurs, and to me, anything less is kind of like, I don't know, but I don't know. There was a lot. There was a creature that was involved that evidently had already traveled there many years ago, and I think it when they met up with it had like half of its brain, and it wanted like one of them as its mate, and they were trying to get to the other half of the spaceship, but none of the but it was just kind of all over the place. So it seemed like it was a neat concept where they apparently the planet was full of these dinosaurs, and they just ended up eating people along the way. And there was a lot of just going, I don't know. To me, it was confusing because they journeyed a lot. So I don't know. It was weird. Because you know how some films come up with this map where it shows you where they go. It follows their journey or whatnot. Sometimes they do that, or you just see them keep going around rocks and shit like that. It was just, I don't know. They spent too much time on journeying from one place to another.
Huh.
Well, it sounds interesting.
Yeah.
I am not 100% sure I got everything in my head.
Well, the gist of it was that they were trying to find a planet for their existence to live, and one person survived this whole thing, and you're not even sure if that person should have survived. None of the characters were ever really. You never really got to care about any of the characters.
That's usually an annoyance sometimes.
Yeah. So
it sounds like there's a lot of potential, but unfortunately, it was lost.
yeah, there was potential. I'll give it that, but I don't know. It just wasn't working for me.
If they had a Velocipaster and a cyborg zombie Fred Rogers and Mega Shark, then you would have been good.
Seriously.
Yeah.
That would be the greatest movie ever.
Dane, I'm behind you on that if you want to direct that.
I would love to. I mean, that would just be... Yeah, I mean, you could, like, even call it, like, Mega Shark Final Wars or, like, you know, Mega Shark Endgame. There you go.
Yeah.
That's what you do. And you literally chuck everything you can think of.
Just so long as you do not do what the Jurassic Dead did.
Okay.
That is a bad movie. That is the worst.
Jurassic Dead.
Which I'll probably put that. You know what? I'm going to put that as my other movie, The Jurassic Dead. Just for the fuck of it.
Oh my god. Well.
Oh god.
So,
Yeah.
Jake, I know you've been chomping at the bit to throw one out there.
Sure. Well, you know, we're going a little slower than sometimes, but we got a good discussion on
Well, you knew it was going to go slower when we lead off with Star Wars.
Exactly.
Yeah, that could just be a whole, like, 2 to 3 hour thing in and of itself.
That had to be done.
we got it whittled down a lot more than I thought we would.
Yeah. I think we do need to do a proper Star Wars either movie or like episode or series on movies.
Yeah, Star Wars needs to be its own like dedicated thing.
Do like Star Wars summer.
There's so much to talk about.
Nice. I see that. Well, okay, I'll go ahead. I hope this is one I've not covered on here. I'm quite sure that it is. But a couple weeks ago, we did. I managed to get through most of the most recent ones. I did hit in theaters. My last one before this whole thing happened was the My Hero Academia movie. But I think I skipped one. I'm almost sure I skipped one. And Brandon, did I cover Ride Your Wave?
No.
Okay,
you got the Hero Academia, but you did not get the
So Kimi to Nami ni Noritara, aka Ride Your Wave, had a whopping 1 showing here in Richmond. 1 showing. And I just managed to catch it. And I'm very happy. And it was a Fathom event. The movie is by Masaki Yuasa, the director of such programs as Night is Short, Walk On Girl, Blue Over the Wall, Devilman Crybaby, The Tatami Galaxy. This guy makes some weird, cool stuff. And it tends to be a very almost a childlike innocence, you could say, to the art style. It's very free form, if you will, but still really pretty art style for this one in particular. So Ride Your Wave is a movie about a young lady named Hinako, I believe it is, Hinako. She moves back home to the town where she grew up upon entering school, and she's a surfer, and it's one of the reasons she moved back home. She loves the ocean, like absolutely loves it. She wants to study oceanography, basically to give her an excuse to be by the ocean and to surf. And a fireman named Minato happens to see her from the rooftop of his firehouse and falls in love with her before ever meeting her. And as it turns out, Minato and his I guess Kohai, the younger fireman that works with him, who's Wasabi, basically they go to her apartment to save her from a fire started by some jerks who were setting off fireworks next door. And this apartment complex was built by the people that did the apartment complex that you used to live in, Brandon. Basically, it's a tinderbox. So, so basically that's how they meet. They end up eventually dating, and you get this really, really intense. You get this cool montage. There's a song that's featured repeatedly throughout the film in different ways. They hear it on the radio, and they both love it, and that's one of the ways they know that they're right for each other, and they play it over the end credits. But during this montage, they play a version sung by the 2 voice actors, and it's called Brand New Story. And then, of course, there's the sister of the fireman, who is very acerbic and antisocial, and her name is Yoko. And then she's teaching this guy to surf because they want to do everything together. They're perfect. They have a great great relationship. And he wants to surprise her by learning more and teaching her what he knows. And so he goes out on his own one day and decides, when he sees some people desperately in need of help, to help them, because that's what he does. He saves people. And he dies. So
all right, I gotta leave. So I'm gonna let you guys go. Time zoning moved me up an hour, so catch you guys later.
Take care.
Bye.
All right.
Now everybody's.
So I ran off with that spoiler, huh? So basically, then you run into this thing that goes from this sweet, sappy love story to her learning to cope with loss. And then she sees him in the water, and she can communicate with him in the water only. And people think she's lost her mind because no one else has. So, it goes from there. And Wasabi and Yoko becoming major parts of her life in different ways and whatever. And so that's the basic gist of it. Like I said, gorgeous film, really well put together. Really deserved a better release here than it got.
That's anime for you.
I know. I love these Fathom releases, but they really it deserved better than one showing. That's
I was thankful that movies like A Night is Short, Walk On Girl, and Lou Over the Wall got as wide a showing as they did.
Well, I didn't get to see Lou Over the Wall either, but we did see Night is Short, Walk On Girl.
Yeah, I mean, I got to see Lou Over the Wall, but not in the theaters. But
and this will get a home video release eventually, but it's like,
that's where I'll see it.
But it needs the theatrical release, especially because it is a film to see in the theater. So was Night is Short, Walk On Girl, but just the visual style is so unique. It's great to see it in a big, and the music was so good too, and that's always a plus for the theater. It's like the music, and again, I guess we didn't really mention this, but it's worth mentioning that yes, whatever one thinks of the Star Wars movies, they are movies to see in the theater.
Yeah,
they definitely are.
Especially the Christmas special.
Oh yeah, one teeny tiny little bone that I would throw towards the fans, as far as like something that I do agree with, which is the sequel trilogy is done, the entire Star Wars saga is wrapped up, blah blah blah. I do agree with the fans that Star Wars now needs to take a good long rest from the movies, from the big screen. Now they should, I love The Mandalorian. They can keep doing stuff on Disney Plus and all that. I think it's great, but I do agree that the series on the big screen, if we even have big screens after this whole thing is done, which, to be honest, I wouldn't really be sad if we didn't have movie theaters anymore, because there's really not a lot of reason to see things in a movie theater outside of a big movie like Star Wars. But point is that I do think we need to have the series take a good long rest before we even think about doing another one.
I don't think the mouse will do that.
Well, if they do another film, then it'll be in a brand new series. Like, I think they were even saying if they were going to do something, that it would be set before Phantom Menace, which is fine. I think if it's way before or way after, then do that. That's fine. But just wait a good while, so that, because Star Wars isn't like Marvel, where Marvel has such a rich, interconnected universe of characters and always has had that. And it's such that you can have characters that are strong enough on their own to sustain their own series, and the fact that they're all together, that makes it even better. But Star Wars doesn't function that way. It's this interconnected world, sure, but the characters, they kind of have to be together, because if they're separate, then they don't really function in the same way. It's so that's the big thing, that you can't make Star Wars like Marvel, and you shouldn't, so, and Star Wars needs to percolate in the public imagination and interest, so that way, if more do come out, that the public's ready for it.
It'd be nice if the suits behind these movies thought about what should happen rather than what dollar signs say will happen.
Oh, I know. That's why that's why I say that. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that's why the DCEU fell flat on its face.
Yeah. The big thing there was that they played it way too safe. They didn't let Zack Snyder's vision really go for it, and
that wasn't it. they were so, I think they were so concerned about trying to, you are right about playing it safe in some ways.
Yeah.
They knew Zack Snyder had a vision, and he did tolerably well with the Man of Steel. But I think they really, mostly, I think their template was Chris Nolan's Batman trilogy. They were like, oh, people love that. They love that dark and gritty. They love that. We gotta have it as dark and gritty and humorless and serious as possible. And that's got to go for every single property, for Flash, for Wonder Woman, for
Yeah,
yeah.
it
And that
doesn't
was
work
what
when you do
ruined
that.
Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad from the start should have been a Guardians of the Galaxy vibe.
Yeah.
And that's why they hired James Gunn for the second now. But yeah,
I mean,
I think
I liked what I got with Suicide Squad, but sure, they could have gone like full hard R and full this and that. I mean, I think the big thing was they played it too safe, and they also were trying to rush to get their universe set up. They were trying to rush way too fast to get their universe set up, so that way they could do their big Avengers type movie, and it just, there's a reason why they're kind of focusing more on standalone stuff, even though technically it's in the same continuity. But I mean, look at, and I've said this from the beginning, Marvel has always been really good with interconnected stories and with crossovers and with, just kind of normal mainline continuity. For the most part, they've been good at that. DC has never really been good with mainline continuity. They've had more resets than I think Marvel even has. Marvel, they've never really done like a Crisis on Infinite Earths kind of thing. They've had a lot of obviously inconsistencies and some resets here and there, but it's never been anything that drastic to where they had to like keep doing it with Crisis on Infinite Earths, this crisis, that crisis, New 52, DC Rebirth. It's like your brain explodes from the continuity resetting all the time. But they've always been really, really good with their standalone, one-shot, kind of self-contained stories. And I mean, that's why, and that translates to their movies as well. That's why Joker was so good, because it was just its own thing, and it didn't have to worry about interconnection or being based on this comic arc or this one or that one. It really was its own movie. Like, you could have called it something else and had it set in New York City or whatever instead of Gotham. Like, it really could have been its own thing. I think it just gets that extra boost by being a Batman thing. But it really just felt like its own thing, and good for it, because there's no reason why you can't do it the way that they did, and obviously it was very successful commercially and critically.
They also did. Birds of Prey was relatively standalone as well, and that even though I still have some serious issues with their using the title Birds of Prey for that particular movie, they did set up the formation of the Birds of Prey, so there's that. But
they tried to retcon it once the movie wasn't performing well. They tried to, which is so dumb. But
it really was a Harley Quinn movie, and I still say if they wanted to go lead off with Harley Quinn, they really should have gone straight into Gotham City Sirens. But this one, though, they did a good job. But like you said, it was a pretty much a standalone adventure. They made references to the other stuff. But, and of course, Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn was a holdover from Suicide Squad. But in the end, they set up their own thing. They set up their own villain. They set up they used Joker effectively without showing him on screen, which was nice. And then, of course, Ewan McGregor's Roman Sionis was just one of the great villains.
I'm sorry to say I didn't see it in theaters, but I did pre-order the Best Buy Steelbook today. So I'll make sure to see that when it comes out. But I mean, the part of the reason why I say I liked what I got with Suicide Squad, because I was there to see Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. Like that's
She
really,
nailed it.
she was so fucking good. She was like one of the most perfect casting choices I've ever seen for a comic book character.
Three of them were spot on. She, Jay Hernandez as El Diablo, and especially Viola Davis as Amanda Waller. The three of them were spot on.
I didn't
Yeah.
mind Captain Boomerang in that. I mean, he's kind of a joke character anyway, so he was just he was kind of fun. I mean, he was also they also had a good rendition in the CW or the networks, well, the Arrowverse, which I think the Arrowverse, and this is something I thought with Star Wars, because Star Wars does its best, I think, when they interconnect. I think connecting the Clone Wars to Revenge of the Sith with a TV series there really did help it, because you could build that continuity. I think that if they had taken the DC interconnected universe and instead of doing its own thing, had decided to hook on to the Arrowverse instead, I think that it would have been I think it would have been a very different thing, because you would have had a lot of lore that could be set up.
Yeah.
Because it really does, if you go to the Arrowverse,
That would have been cool.
It feels like you're reading comics. It really does, because I was talking to Jake the other day. It's like, there's a crossover, but if you skip that issue and you move on, you're okay.
Well, that's in a way what you're describing is kind of the inverse of what Marvel did, where their series were spin-offs of the film universe. So, you know, not to say that it couldn't happen. I mean, I think that'd be pretty neat if it did happen. You know, but I mean, that for me was like the big reason why I enjoyed Suicide Squad, because I thought that Margot Robbie absolutely knocked it out of the park and really brought the character to life in live action, and I was just so blown away by it. And you know, so in that respect, I enjoyed it. I think if you took her out, then it would be super forgettable and messy and all that.
Well, it was messily edited. The editing really was rough. And
which and you know what was sad about that? Apparently the first half was edited by some company that made trailers, and then the second half was edited by the person that was credited or whatever. Which, well, the sad part is I liked the way that the first half was edited more, because it was more psychedelic, and that's part of why I liked that first half a lot, because I was like, this reminds me a lot of Natural Born Killers, you know, and I was like, imagine if they had gone full-blown psychedelic and full-blown insane like Natural Born Killers. That would have been amazing.
And the trailer was badass, and that's why they brought those people in to recut the movie. But it was like, but again, nothing can save the script was trash. It was a horrible, horrible script. And if they had written a better script for the movie, and if they hadn't turned Joker into a juggalo, they probably would have had a really good movie.
Well, but you're talking specifically about the movie that was actually on screen, because there were a lot of reshoots. You know, for all we know, which I never read the script that, you know, was there before. Obviously, they did all the reshoots, because from what I understand, see, I can't hate. I cannot hate what Jared Leto did with the Joker, because really it wasn't his fault, because most of what he did not end up on the screen, and he did a lot of preparation for that character. So, I mean, I think he got really screwed over, and like we never really got to see what his Joker could have been. Obviously, it would not have been the same as Heath Ledger, nor would it have been Joaquin Phoenix or Jack Nicholson, and it shouldn't have been. It should have been its own thing, and it was its own thing. I just, you know, he didn't really get a chance to shine like he could have. But, you know, then again, it wasn't his movie, you know, so like I didn't mind the fact that he wasn't in it all that much, because if anything, I think the Joker's a little overdone these days, even though what Heath Ledger did was great. What Joaquin Phoenix did was wonderful, and what Jack Nicholson did was wonderful. You know, I love what all they did. Is just like, I think other villains need to get the spotlight for once. So I didn't mind that he wasn't in it all that much, but because he wasn't in it all that much, he didn't really get a chance to shine like I know he could have. because he can act really well. I mean, he won Best Supporting Actor for a reason.
Well, I don't think it was any issue with his talent. And one of the things I've had this debate with Brandon over the years of who was better, Ledger versus Nicholson. And I've always given to Ledger partly because of his commitment to the role. And Leto was committed to the role. I will give him that. But again, just to me, the idea of playing him as a gangsta thug just doesn't jibe with the character. There are so many ways to play the Joker, but that just isn't one of them in my mind.
Well, I mean, the version they were going with was the one with all the tats and stuff, which,
Right.
you know, I mean, that's not my favorite either. I mean, my favorite, which even, you know, what Heath Ledger was doing was great, but that, to me, in my head, that's not what the Joker is. I mean, the Joker, to me, is closer to what Jack Nicholson was doing, if you're talking about live action, but closest to what Mark Hamill did in the animated series, because there he could be funny and goofy. Well, he could be funny, goofy, scary, you know, psychotic. He could be everything all in one. And I mean, that to me, the Joker is not any one thing. You know, he's everything pretty much. You know, because his mind can go anywhere.
I've always thought of him as a very Shakespearean character. Like, you know, you've seen so many different versions of Hamlet.
Yeah,
it keeps getting done, and I see the Joker in that light. Like you. And again, my biggest issue this time around was not Leto so much. It's always kind of been a crawl in my brow, as they say. But really, the script and the editing are the biggest issues.
All of which you have to look through the lens of studio interference, because if that hadn't have been there, then, you know, you would have gotten a different product, I think.
Yes, I wish we had. And supposedly, they claim there's not enough additional footage to do a different cut. They claim.
Yeah, they claim, but they also claim that about the Zack Snyder cut too of Justice League, which Justice League pissed me off more than Batman v Superman or Suicide Squad did. Reason being is because that movie reeked of reshoots and post-production interference. You know, like the other ones, like if you didn't know that, then you might suspect it, but it wasn't quite as blatant as Justice League. Because and part of the reason why I say that is because Justice League, you know, originally you have Zack Snyder, who's, you know, whether or not you like his movies or whatever, he's one of the most visually talented directors that's working today. Like he has an eye for composition that is unreal, and you know, he can communicate. Well, part of why I liked Batman v Superman overall was he was able to convey a ton of visual information in the course of one shot that you don't even need any dialogue for. And it's like, if that's not movie making, I don't know what is. You know, and so you've got that guy, and you can argue over the sophistication of his scripts or whatever. You know, same with like Michael Bay. You could argue that as well. I think Zack Snyder's scripts are overall more intelligent than Michael Bay's, but they both point is they both come from the world of commercials and music videos. And if you come from those worlds, then you have to have a really, really good visual eye. And they both do. They have an eye for composition that, to me, makes them the envy of other people in their field, at least in that department. Then you have Joss Whedon, who visually is really not that spectacular of a director. Like his visuals are really nothing to shake a stick at, but you know, he's always been strong with writing and with characterization and with witty dialogue and with you know, great interactions between characters to convey who they are pretty quickly and entertainingly. But you try to merge those styles together, and it's so jarring, because you'll have like this beautiful shot, you know, wonderful shot composition with great movement and great everything like that, and then you'll have like these very static, you know, shots of people talking, which admittedly those interactions are really great and they're great for conveying character and all that stuff, but they're so like compositionally they're so boring to look at that, you know, you have to it's so jarring. And I think you could you could do both. Like you can have like speaking of Shakespeare, like in Kenneth Branagh's version of Hamlet,
Yeah.
you know, that Hamlet's obvious in any Shakespeare play, it's all about the words, obviously, but he doesn't, Kenneth Branagh does not skimp on the shot composition whatsoever. You know, if anything, the visuals do just as much work. Like he does a lot of long takes, he does a lot of moving shots, you know, a lot of steady cam stuff. It's like he keeps the frame interesting while you're listening to, you know, the best written words in the English language. You know, so it can be done.
Or a couple of his others. I mean, he did Thor, he did Murder on the Orient Express. Both of those had some pretty good
yeah,
you know.
well, so like he get, that's my point, is you can get both sides of the spectrum and meld them together to make something that's really great to listen to and really great to look at. And I feel like the fact that, and again, it couldn't really be helped because of the tragedy that happened with Zack Snyder and his family. It's like, I don't blame him whatsoever for having to, you know, leave the project. It's like that, you know, I wouldn't have wished that on anybody. And, you know, so it's not anybody's fault, you know, whatsoever. It's unfortunate that they picked somebody who, his style, while it's great for what it's great for, it doesn't gel with with Zack Snyder's style. And it wouldn't have even been all that bad if they hadn't made such a big deal that, oh, you know, his Joss Whedon can copy someone else's style. Bullshit. You know, that was the biggest lie I've ever heard in my life. You know,
they would have been better off with Branagh or actually with Chris Nolan stepping.
Yeah,
been willing to do that.
Chris Nolan would have probably been able to do what they were looking for because they were trying to get Snyder to copy Nolan.
Right.
Yeah.
And Nolan was a producer on all those films.
Yeah. He could have given him like a second unit credit, if nothing else, you know. It's I don't know, like, which and Zack Snyder, like, his visual style has always been really, really strong. I mean, people have said, you know, oh, he's been Nolanified once he did Man of Steel, and to a certain extent that was true. But I mean, you know, you looked at Watchmen, and you know, it wasn't tonally all that different from Man of Steel, obviously, you know, which, and again, speaking of Shakespeare, again, like, with Watchmen, they lifted almost all of the dialogue word for word from what Alan Moore wrote, which is wonderful. But, like, you know, so they had the words and they had the great visuals to match them. So it can be done. But, like, you know, I don't think that it was quite as much of a... I think he was kind of doing what the producer wanted and also what the studio expected, but I didn't think it was that far outside the realm of his own sensibilities, at least not from what I've seen of his work.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I agree with you 100%. Snyder has style, and he does have definite skill and flair with the camera, with the staging, all this stuff. Watchmen was a gorgeous film, all except for the horrible makeup. And
300 was a gorgeous film in a lot of ways.
300 was great. Sucker Punch was a gorgeous film.
Well, and look back even at his version of Dawn of the Dead. Like, that's an incredibly visually rich film, and it didn't have the budget of, you know, the other ones. I mean, it wasn't a small budget by any means, but it wasn't anywhere near, you know, the Man of Steel or Justice League budget. You know, and I think, honestly, when you look at directors like him and like Michael Bay, like, the best films of theirs to look at are the smaller scale ones, like Dawn of the Dead, and like from Michael Bay, look at like Pain and Gain, because they're the ones that have the smallest. Say it again.
It's an inside joke because Pain and Glory was coming out and it had big Oscar talk. I had mistaken Pain and Gain, and slightly different film.
Well, Pain and Gain was awesome. That's my favorite of Michael Bay's work without a doubt, because I thought the script was so funny and so witty. But like
smaller scale one, like his Oscar nominated, and I think they rescinded the nomination, whatever. But the 13 Hours, that was a good film. But that's exactly my point. That was like a relatively small budget story, and
one that he clearly had a passion about. And I thought it was quite solid. It actually had the best acting overall, like the best cast out of any of his films. Like they weren't like mega stars, but they had a name to them, and they were just really, really solid, great actors.
That was
And
John Krasinski is the star, right?
yeah, and he did fantastic, and the people around him did really well as well. Like it was just a really good, solid group of people, and it wasn't like, say, Armageddon, which that was like every big name in Hollywood at that time all in one movie, pretty much.
Right.
Which, I mean, that's a high caliber, film of a different kind. It was more like the 90s equivalent of like something like the 10 Commandments in terms of the size of the cast, but 13 Hours is more like these are just really, really good, solid actors that all do great work together. And but anyway, with that, with Pain and Gain or with Dawn of the Dead, you see their visual eye in service of a story that doesn't have to please quite so many people. It can afford to be kind of off the wall. It can afford to be more experimental, more crazy, things like that. And it can pay off. Like, and that's why I love Pain and Gain, because like it was considerably more off the wall than anything else he's ever done, and that's because the budget was his smallest, so there wasn't this massive risk, and so he could afford to do something that allowed him to do things that he wouldn't normally do. Like he did a lot of great shots with GoPros, and with being able to get shots that you could never get with a larger conventional film camera. And just if you watch it, there's just a lot of really cool, interesting ways to tell a story visually, and combined with a script that, to me, does a great job of not following a lot of conventional film structure, but in a refreshing way to tell this story that, is the real story is even crazier, than what you saw on screen. So,
though, you're saying like a small little movie, but I'm just looking this up. That is a pretty incredible cast.
For which one?
Pain and Gain.
Oh yeah, that one had a great cast too. I mean, I think that's another example where you have, and part of the reason that cast, they actually, Michael Bay, Mark Wahlberg, Dwayne Johnson, they all took pretty sizable pay cuts to do it, because that's the only way that it could be done. And also because, by the time that Michael Bay got to that, like he had done 3 Transformers movies in a row, and like he clearly only had passion for the first one. The other 2 were clearly just they were clearly just a job. And it's like when he's doing something just for money, you can really, really tell, because he half-asses it pretty heavily. But when he's doing something that he actually cares about, like it's a different level of energy and focus and things like that. And so by the time we finished the first, once he did 3 Transformers movies in a row, he was like, I have got to do something else besides robots fighting each other. And so that's why he did Pain and Gain, and it was like a much smaller scale film. But he and the other stars, they took pay cuts to do it, just because it was something that they wouldn't normally do. But yeah, the people they're surrounded with, like Tony Shalhoub was amazing in that film. Right. He was so funny, and like just a lot of, and even like Ed Harris, who he'd worked with before in On the Rock, which is a great film also. It's like they all did really well together, and it does show that he can make a good film if he has a good script, and if it's something that he really cares about. Because when he doesn't care about it, it really shows. When it's just a job, then it really shows. But
The Rock is one of Ed Harris's better roles.
Yeah, and that's probably has possibly one of the best villains in any action film ever, because he's kind of the total opposite of your typical like 80s or 90s action movie villain, because he's really not villainous in the classical sense. Like what he wants is perfectly understandable, and he's going about it in an extreme way that gets out of hand, but it's it's something that, he's not really megalomaniacal or inhuman or a cartoon character or anything. He's a pretty decently fleshed out human being relative to the kind of movie that he's in, so.
Actually, this circles back to something that we mentioned earlier. Again, my wish that they had gone with Gotham City Sirens. One of my absolute favorite characters in all of comics is Poison Ivy, and she desperately needs a proper treatment on the big screen.
She does.
It wasn't properly treated in Batman and Robin.
But you reminded me in the recent comics, she has been rebranded as more of an anti-hero than a villain.
I could see it.
There actually is a comic where Batman specifically says she's not evil, she's not crazy like the others, she's just misguided, she's going about things the wrong way. And in a sense, she's very similar to that Ed Harris character. Like they're very, very understandable if you look at their motivations.
Exactly.
They're kind of going about it the wrong way.
Yeah, well, I mean, but even then, like, it's not even as extreme as it could have gone. If it gets out of hand, it's because of, the probabilities of things going wrong, that get in the way. But with Poison Ivy, I mean, I think she definitely deserves better than what she's gotten, which is too bad because I know that Uma Thurman has the acting talent to have played that character really, really well. And it's not to say that she even did poorly relative to the tone that the movie was going for. Like, if anything, like if as far as like doing like a full blown campy thing, she did that, and I think she actually had more energy than some of the other actors as far as that kind of portrayal. But I think the big thing that Batman and Robin, because it was so studio mandated to be campy and to be like a toy commercial, it doesn't have the charming absurdity of something like the 60s show, which that just felt a lot more sincere, and it felt a lot more, well, of its time, which is not to say that Batman and Robin also isn't of its time, because it very much is. But it was more sincere, it had more charm, and just the fact that they went full blown with the absurdity and still treated it seriously despite it being absurd, which thus made it funny. It didn't feel quite so much like mugging to the camera just for a large paycheck, even though like the really good actors that were on the 60s show, they weren't, starving or anything. And they specifically wanted to be on that show because they did get a chance to be way over the top and to do things they wouldn't normally do. But there was more of a kind of sincere spirit of fun about that show that wasn't in Batman and Robin. And that's like the real reason why I think people don't like it so much, because it's not even that it's campy, it's that it's campy for the wrong reasons, because the 60s show was sincere with what it was trying to do.
All I say is when they do make Gotham City Sirens, I really, 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 really hope they hire Amanda Connor, who's the one who wrote the Harley Quinn comic series, get her to do the screenplay, and I really hope it has that sense of fun, because the Harley Quinn series is one of the most fun comic series out there. And Harley and Ivy together, they're such a great team together. And then, of course, there was that little web series, the Gotham City Girls. If they inject a little bit of that absurdity into it, too, that could be kind of fun.
Yeah.
So, to move on, because we're running over time.
Yeah.
But I did want to get one cycle in at least.
Dane hasn't presented
one. So I definitely want to make sure that we wrap up before quarter till at the latest.
Yeah.
So
sorry, I've been,
No. I mean,
these are all things that you could easily spend 2 to 3 hours talking about.
This is supposed to be some fun, and that's the idea, is having some fun
Exactly.
during this. So, and I don't. If it wasn't for me wanting to eat dinner tonight, it would be a quicker thing.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, you get me talking about Star Wars or comic books, and I just go off,
Right.
But as
But,
far as like what I've been watching,
yeah, a movie to throw out there.
I've been watching a lot. Just trying to pick one. I mean, like, I think okay, something that this is more than one movie, but it's the same general theme. I've been trying to watch a lot of cannibal movies because I've had a lot of. Don't ask me why, but like for these last several months, if not a little bit longer than that, I've had like a really big kick with cannibalism in films and in fiction. And I think that it's partially because it's something that has existed since forever, pretty much, and it's something that has transcended all different cultures and things. It's still very much taboo in civilized society. It's still it's had a decent exploration in fiction, but it's not overdone to the same extent of like other kinds of things. And because whenever you mention it, people's insides kind of tighten up, which is always a nice feeling if you're an artist. You always want to find those things that kind of make people, like their guts kind of get all tangled in knots as soon as they hear it. And it's not like in quite the same way as like if you did something about like abortion in the United States, then that is a clenching up in a way that you're like, okay, are we gonna like destroy some friendships or some relationships here? Are we gonna, it's like that's not that kind of thing. It's more of like the fun kind of clenching up of one's insides to where you're like forced to think about something that has existed since the dawn of time pretty much, but it's something that people don't really like to think about, and it kind of puts their mind into a more unsavory place than they're necessarily used to. So that's why I've been, and also there's like the psychological slash somewhat sexually deviant aspects to it that I think make for interesting storytelling. But I've been watching I watched two of them recently. I watched Cannibal Holocaust finally. It took me forever to finally watch it. And I watched Emmanuel and the Last Cannibals. And actually, a couple months before that, I watched Eli Roth's The Green Inferno, which was obviously an homage to the 70s, 80s, and 80s cannibal films. So I saw that first. I saw the homage first, just because it was more readily accessible. It was on Netflix, and I really enjoyed it for what it was. But I was also like, well, okay, now that I've seen that, I need to actually go back and see the originals. But people like Eli Roth, like Quentin Tarantino, people of that 70s generation, they can be a good entree to the the films that inspired them. But so yeah, I went back and finally watched Cannibal Holocaust first, and I can, because it's the Blu-ray that I have of it, it says the most controversial movie ever made, and I don't know if it would necessarily be the most, because like I've seen different lists of controversial movies and they have different ones at number one. Like Entertainment Weekly, they put The Passion of the Christ at number one, which
Really?
I mean, it was certainly controversial in terms of like its effect on society at the time, but I don't really think it's necessarily controversial. I don't think that the controversy it stirred up has really lasted, at least not to me. It hasn't lasted in quite the same way as like something like Cannibal Holocaust or Caligula, the way that those controversies have managed to last. Because I mean, really, the controversy over the Passion of the Christ was really just wrapped up in the politics of the mid 2000s. That was really all it was. At its core, it hasn't really transcended in quite the same way. But with Cannibal Holocaust, it's like, I think it was a really good film for what it was trying to do. it's probably the most brutally violent film I've ever seen, even more so than The Passion of the Christ. Which it certainly gives it a run for its money, but Cannibal Holocaust, the difference there is that The Passion of the Christ, for as brutal as it was, it's only really brutal in in spurts, and the brutality that's there, it's like pretty clearly serves a purpose, like a larger narrative purpose. And that was one of the things that people talked about back and forth, as, oh, it's senseless, or no, it's meaningful, it's spiritual, it's this and that. People all had different reactions to it. But with Cannibal Holocaust, like, it is unrelentingly brutal towards humans and especially towards animals. And it's like there's 6 animal killings that are shown on screen in pretty explicit detail, and they're very kind of sadistic. And it's one of those things where you could never make that movie that way again, and you really shouldn't, without CGI or puppetry or something. And I get I get thematically why it's there, because the reason why is because you see humans being brutal to animals, and that kind of psychologically sets you up for the brutality of humans towards other humans of all different stripes, because it's not just the cannibals in the Amazon being sadistic towards the civilized people. It's actually quite the reverse in a lot of ways. Obviously the cannibals, they do their thing, but the civilized people, they're quite sadistic towards the natives too, in their own ways. And so it sets you up for not only that part of humanity, but it also, because they commit violence in such a way that they're not able to fake it, and you couldn't have faked that kind of violence back then. Because of that, and because you see it in such explicit detail, then it helps to blur the lines between what's real and what's not, and thus make it more effective. So, it's one of those things where, for what it is and what it's trying to do, it does make for a very effectively brutal film. But it's just sad to see these animals being needlessly killed in such graphic and horrible ways. And I mean, it's like you could never do that today, and you shouldn't do that today. And I mean, I don't think it was, I kind of heard different things about the state of that sort of thing in Italian cinema at the time. Obviously, like, the rules weren't in American cinema anyway. The rules were not what they are today, because, like, you could see, like, in Apocalypse Now, you saw a cow being killed for kind of ritualistic purposes. It's pretty quick, and it's pretty clearly it looks like something that if you were making a documentary, you could have just pointed the camera that way and seen something that was going on anyway. It's not quite so sadistic, and also I guess with Heaven's Gate, they had a lot of horses get killed in their big battle scenes and stuff. So the rules were a little bit shakier, I think, back then, even for American cinema, let alone Italian cinema.
Oh.
But I think because of those films that I named, and especially Cannibal Holocaust, I think that's why they rightfully cracked down on the abuse of animals on set, and the killing of them and everything. So it's something that I get the purpose, but it also it's kind of like, it is what it is. It's like, it's effective, but it's like you hate the fact that these animals had to suffer and die for this purpose. Which, again, I mean, it's not like that doesn't happen in real life. It definitely happens in real life. It's just sad that it was done explicitly for this film, when it that I don't know if there was a way to, I don't know. It just, you feel very conflicted about it, because it does make for effective cinema, but it's just at what cost, but that was it was an effective film for what it was trying to be, and it pioneered the found footage genre, and it was just, it was a very brutally intense film, and I mean that as a compliment.
I think it's that way when you go with a lot of films. There is that importance to cinema. It's like that Harry Potter line that I that keeps coming back, but it means something, you know, terrible things, yet great things indeed. I mean, films like, gosh, what is that film's name? The maybe it's probably better I forgot it. Like one of the first films that was ever made, feature films in the United States, 1915.
Oh, The Birth of a Nation?
Yes, it was a terrible film.
Yeah.
Especially for what it represented. But at the same time, would I say we need to ban it or get rid of it? No, because it still bears importance.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why I disagree with Song of the South being kind of pushed under the rug.
Well, in the United States, in Europe, they don't give a shit. You know, Disney doesn't give a shit. They'll put it out in Europe. In other places, they just care about the U.S. But it's like, yeah, I'm with you as far as like, if you don't understand your history, then you're condemned to repeat it. And you know, it's like it exists. It's there. You don't need to hide it. You know, or pretend I vehemently disagree with like, you know, cancel culture or you know, pretending like something doesn't exist or whatever, because that's just self-delusional and it's lying basically and hiding the truth, as unpleasant as that truth is. Which even all you got to do is do what the Cannibal Holocaust Blu-ray did. Was they had two versions of the film that you could watch: the original uncut version and the animal cruelty-free version, where they cut out the animal deaths. And with the uncut version, which I watched because I want to see the real thing, you know, even then they had a disclaimer, you know, and they said that they were releasing this uncut as it was, you know, made and intended, because they didn't want to, you know, censor the past, even as, you know, bad as it was, you know. And it's like, that's how I feel about it. It's like, you know, we can't control the fact that it happened, but we still have to look, because if we don't, then we won't learn these lessons, you know. And that's always the attitude I've had with it. So like, you know, same with like The Birth of a Nation or Triumph of the Will or something, you know, what they represent on a moral or political level, societal level, you know, is not what we would consider to be good today. But in terms of like filmmaking and the significance of what they did for film as an art form, I mean, they're classics and well regarded for a reason, because they did advance the medium so much. You know, it just, they'll always have that asterisk next to them, you know, for good reason. But I mean, we also shouldn't pretend like they don't exist either. So like, I saw that one, and then I saw Emmanuel and the Last Cannibals, which was an entry in the Black Emmanuel series, which I guess was a Italian knockoff of the French Emmanuel films. And I guess there have been a ton of other unofficial entries in that series of, you know, erotic films or whatever. But Emmanuel and the Last Cannibals was starring Laura Gemser, who I had never seen her in a film before, but man, she had to be one of the most beautiful women of her time. Unbelievable. But like, she I guess had starred in as Emmanuel in other installments, but that particular one was meant to kind of fuse the erotic genre with the emerging cannibal film genre of exploitation. And you know, it was a weird thing, because on the one that I was watching, I got the Severin Films Blu-ray of it, and I was toggling between the English dub and the Italian language version. I kept trying to figure out which is like the most official thing, because obviously, as you know from Italian cinema in like the 70s and 80s and stuff, I think even the 60s too, like they would have the actors speak their native language on set, whatever it was, and then they would just dub it into whatever language that you know, that was going to be in whatever country it was going to be in. But the thing is, like, what you get with a film like that, it's not this way with every Italian film from that era that I've seen, but like with this film, no matter which setting I chose, Italian or English for the dubbing, the words didn't match up with their lips at all. Like it did not matter. Even if in the Italian they didn't match even remotely. So it's like, who knows what they were really saying on set? You know, they could have been saying, you know, Peter Piper picked a pack of pickled peppers like the entire time, and you know, we wouldn't have known. You know, it just it didn't matter. And I guess perhaps that was partially because they knew that it would just be dubbed, but it was like, you know, they could have been saying anything, and the whole movie did feel very much like, you know, they just recorded the film footage with just a camera, and they didn't even bother recording on set sound, because the whole thing just felt like it was done in post-production as far as sound goes. And so that was kind of weird, but yeah, it has like some of the most jarring dubbing in both Italian and English. So because I couldn't find a perfect solution, I was just like, well, fuck it. I'm just going to put on the English dub, which I really don't want to do. But it's like, well, if it doesn't match up in Italian, then, well, what choice do I have, really? But yeah, as a film, like, it was much more of an erotic film than it was even necessarily a cannibal film. It got that way more in the second half. And you know, it was an interesting fusion, but after having come off of Cannibal Holocaust, which technically Emmanuel and the Last Cannibals did come 3 years before, but after having come off of Cannibal Holocaust, it makes anything else look pretty kindergarten by comparison. And especially like with the actual effects that were done of, you know, someone's stomach being ripped open and stuff like that. It's like, after you've seen Cannibal Holocaust and you see something else doing it, it's like, it seems so pedestrian and so obviously like a makeup effect. You know, Cannibal Holocaust, you know, as hard to watch and needlessly cruel as the animal deaths are, what it does do is it does blur those lines to where when human on human violence happens, it's quite hard to tell what's real and what's not. And like when someone's getting eaten alive, like, there are no real obvious makeup effects. And I mean, there's a reason why the director, you know, got arrested, because they thought that he had made a snuff film, you know, and they had to prove that the actors were still alive. But it's like, but, you know, in a weird sort of way, it's like the ultimate compliment towards the film's realism, you know, the fact that they thought it was real. And, you know, for a lot of it, it's like you really can't tell. So like, yeah, after having seen that, and then you go into a more, shall we say, more conventional cannibal film, then it just feels so pedestrian in comparison. But, you know, it was still worth seeing, if for no other reason that you get to see a lot of, you know, nudity and a lot of but in both films the music is incredible. It has that really great, you know, late 70s, early 80s, you know, kind of, well, the Emmanuel, it's more disco-y, and then Cannibal Holocaust is more kind of orchestral mixed with really creepy electronics score. And you know, it's just that unique period of film music that you can't really reproduce. And you know, so they were both very different, but I like to do my research on cannibalism films as much as possible, up to and including some weeks before that, I watched Bone Tomahawk, which was a unique blend of the Western and cannibal genres.
Well, actually, that is an interesting note for us to start wrapping up on. We have gone all the way around, and I'm glad that we got a good cycle out of this. I'm going to have to. One I was sad I didn't get to, but I think we'll have to start off with it next time we get to it, is that movie Antrim, because that's going to be one, but it bears a lot more than 5 minutes. We'd have to discuss it.
Which isn't it funny that you're mentioning that, because a good friend of mine told me, dude, you have got to watch this. Like, he was really insistent on it, and I watched it, and yeah, and I enjoyed it. I don't think I was quite as gaga about it as he was, but the things that we were gaga about, you know, I really, really liked about it. And so, yeah, I mean, it seems to have gotten somewhat of a kind of post-mortem buzz in a way.
So that's a little taste for what could be coming next time.
All right.
But thank you again for coming on with us. We always appreciate the extra insight, and we had some interesting conversation, especially about Star Wars and DC Comics.
Both of which, if you threw in cannibalism, then you'd have something. And if you chuck those cannibals at the mega shark, oh boy, then. Which I mean, we did look at the Meg, and that had some cannibalistic sharks in it.
The zombie cyborg Mr. Rogers, you gotta remember that.
Exactly.
And there is a cannibalism scene in Quest for Fire,
All right.
which is tomorrow night's big film. So,
yep.
Times. I hope Dave posts that if the other link didn't work. But
yeah, the YouTube link for that film worked fine, and that's what I was watching before I got on here. And I did get to the scene where they were rolling around in the ashes of the fire, and they found the bones, and they were like, "Uh oh,"
Yeah.
So